Let me read verses 6 to 9. Philippians 4, 6 to 9. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and God of peace will be with you. Here is this passage. If you have passage on the screen from King James Version, and if you look into the text, some Bible scholars believed that these two passages come from different sources because they have some parallel thoughts, because both of these passages from 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 finish with the same thought. If you look at verse 7, it says, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. And then at the end of verse 9, we have the same thought, and the God of peace will be with you. So it seems that we have kind of repetition here, and but I don't think it comes from two different sources. I think Paul is here speaking about something extremely important. And of course, if we go before verse 6, I mentioned this morning, the text says, rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. And then starts this, do not be anxious about anything. So this passage has been considered by several scholars that Paul here is using the method, psychiatrist method, which was used in the time when Paul lived, to somehow bring peace to human mind. This method that people believe is used here is called bona cogitare, and it comes from the Greek philosopher Epicurus. In order to make it very simple, this method, bona cogitare, and I think yes, it is probably partially used here, because Bible writers and all those inspired authors, if there was something in the world which would express their thoughts, they would use it. We know that Paul was well acquainted with the writers of ancient Greece. For example, in Acts chapter 17, he was able to quote by heart some Greek authors like Epimenides, for example. Epimenides lived 6 centuries before Christ, and Aratus, another Greek author who lived 3 centuries later, when Paul was saying, for in him we live and move and have our being. This is direct quote from Epimenides, but Paul is using this in different context, of course. I'm not going to do this into that this afternoon, but it is extremely. I receive phone calls. Many of our church members are going through extremely difficult times. There is uncertainty, there is fear, there is anxiety, and this passage is dealing exactly with this. And peace is something in today's world extremely precious. So let's at least try to understand what Paul is using. Let me first say a few words about this psychiatrist method, bona cogitare, which was used at the time of Paul. Extremely simple. I'm going to simplify this as much as possible. It consists of the whole method consists of two words basically, and these two words are avocatio and revocatio. These are the Latin words, and bona cogitare is also a Latin word. Avocatio means to call to, and revocatio to get rid of. What does it mean? It means avocatio. Why it was used in ancient times psychiatry. It means avocatio, turn away your mind from what is painful, from every grief. Avocatio, turn your mind from what is painful. And revocatio, turn your mind to what is pleasant. So in other words, this method, bona cogitare, means to replace your painful thoughts, suffering thoughts, which make you suffer and create pain in your mind, and replace them with pleasant thoughts. This is, in its essence, bona cogitare method. And there are many cases in ancient world. Let me first go to history, and then we'll come back to the Bible. For example, one of the church fathers, his name is Chrysostom. He says that Paul here expressed, and he also believed that Paul is using here bona cogitare method. This is a consolation, a medicine that heals grief and hardship and all that is painful. But to come back more to history, Epicurus said that we have to distract our mind from hardship by contemplating the pleasure. So, for example, Epicurus, when he was on his deathbed, he was suffering from urinary blockage. We would say today from prostate problems, and he had intense dysentery, pain, and he was suffering greatly. But then he writes, Epicurus, from his deathbed, that he avocatio, he turned away his mind from his urinary blockage and from his intense pain, and he revocatio, he directed his thoughts to his disciples, to his philosophy, to the time when he walked with his disciples through his garden, strolling when the sun was setting in ancient Greece. So this is an Epicurean method which was used by many ancient psychiatrists. But another Roman author, Cicero, he raised huge objections to this Epicurean method, bona cogitare, and he says when we are in the circumstances that tear us apart, vex us, burn us, leave us unable to breathe, how can we turn away our mind from this pain and revocatio, turn to what is pleasure? He says to Epicurus, do you urge us to forget This is contrary to nature, he says. But then we have another cases in history where some prominent authors of the Roman times used their friends to use this method bona cogitare. So, for example, Seneca, and he is very famous author and politician of ancient Rome, he urged his friend Polybus to direct his thoughts away from his brother's death. So Polybus' brother died, and he was greatly disturbed by that event. But then Seneca writes to him and he says, turn away your thoughts, avocatio, from your brother's death, and think about family duties, about public office, about serving the Caesar, about your literary pursuit, pleasant memories of your family, and think about your surviving brothers. Yes, one brother died, but you have several surviving brothers. Think about your wife. Think about your son. So avocatio, revocatio. And also Seneca was expelled, and he died from Roman politics. And he wrote to his mother using the same method, bona cogitare. And he wrote several letters to his mother telling her not to worry about him and not to worry about his exile, but instead of that to think about other sons that she has, to think about her grandchildren, about the memory of her father, to think about her sister. In other ways, to summarize these historical elements, the background of this method which is used, bona cogitare, it is simply kind of method that was used by Sigmund Freud, you know, when Freud in his psychoanalysis, but Freud is 20th century author. This is kind of archaeology of psyche, where you go backwards and you are looking for some negativity, something that happened when you were a small child, and when you understand, try to replace this with something else. This is not unknown in other religious or philosophies. Maybe you know, maybe you don't, that Stoicism was a philosophy in the time of Christianity. In the first centuries, Stoicism was competing for the minds of people with Christianity in the first few centuries. And Stoicism was basically saying that we have to transcend the state in which we find ourselves. We have to simply forget and deny all passions, even passions of love and grief and the pain. Transcend all these state of emotions and passions. If we succeed in transcending this, we will reach the state of enlightenment. Once we reach the state of enlightenment, we'll never come back to this world. I still remember my high school philosophy teacher who he was speaking about the slave, and he was Stoic. Stoicism was interesting because slaves and emperor himself, they were member of the same philosophical. Can you imagine? In the same group, you have the emperor and you have the slaves, like Marcus Aurelius and so on and so on. So they were bending the leg of that slave, but he was not moved at all. You know, there are these means for torture. You might have seen them in British Museum. As they were bending his leg, he was not moved at all, because he was a Stoic. He reached enlightenment, and he went above all emotions. But this is Stoicism. Bona cogitare is more replace avocatio, your negative thoughts, turn away your mind from what is negative and think about what is pleasure. So in that sense, if you know now this background, if you if we come back to the passage that we are reading, then Paul is saying, this is verse 6 again, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and petition with thanksgiving present your request to God. So, okay, pray, you express your thanksgiving, and then you have here verse 8. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. This is the key. Think about such things. So it seems to some authors that Paul is urging church members in Philippi to replace their thoughts, avocatio. So their anxiety, if they're anxious, if they fear, if they're unhappy, to avocatio, to turn away their thoughts from these and to replace them with true, noble, pure, lovely, admirable. Think about such things. Tauta logi este is in Greek. Think about these things. If we go back a little bit, and the things can become much clearer to us, what was going on in Paul's life at that moment. If we go to Philippians chapter 1, verse 12, the text says, now I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel. So Paul is in the prison, but in spite of this, he believes that even his prison life served to advance the gospel. Interesting. Then verse 13, as a result, it has become clear throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I am in chains for Christ. So in spite of the painful moments of his life, he sees this experience as kind of means to preach the gospel, because throughout the whole palace guard, everyone else know that this is these chains are for Christ. If we go a little bit further in verse 16, the text says, I am put here for the defense of the gospel. So he sees some positive things in his imprisonment. Verse 18, but what does it matter? The important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached. So again, positive aspect in spite of everything. Then verse 20, second part, 22nd part. Christ will be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death. Oh, interesting here. So whatever happens, Paul says, and you know, the death was approaching for Paul when he wrote this epistle. Christ will be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death. Then verse 23, I am to go on living in the body. This will mean fruitful labor for me. Yet, what shall I choose? I do not know. I am torn between the two. I desire to depart and be with Christ, which is better by far. And then this is Paul's experience. The death is approaching. He is going through a very difficult time. But verse 29, for it has been granted to you on behalf of Christ, not only to believe on him, but also to suffer for him. Interesting. So I think in Roman Catholic Church, we have this suffering with Christ element. And this is more Hindu concept, that even suffering can be positive. I believe evil is evil. It has no positive. Although sometimes when we go through the difficulties, it may help us to draw some conclusions. And then verse 30 says that not only Paul is suffering, but church members in Philippi are also going through the difficult times. The text says, since you are going through the same struggle you saw, I had, and now hear that I still have. So they are also, probably there was a persecution, and they are going through a difficult moments in their life. And in all of this, of course, Paul is saying this, the Lord is near. I'm now in chapter 4, verse 6. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your request to God. Now, is Paul blindly using here bona cogitare method, which was used by psychiatrists of his time? Not at all. There might be some influence of bona cogitare method here in Philippians, but this is not used blindly at all. Bona cogitare, psychiatrist principle, is simply a technique where they teach you replace your negative thoughts about pain and struggle, avocatio, replace them, revocatio, with the positive, with the pleasure thoughts. But Paul is introducing here something else. He knows very well that this is not an easy process, that this is not as simple as it looks, but he is introducing supernatural element here. He is introducing God himself and his supernatural activity in human life. And this is Christianity all about, because he says, do not be anxious about it, but in everything by prayer, this is supernatural, and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. So he knows if we are to change our negative thoughts, our fear, our anxiety, our sometimes meaningless lives, we need supernatural power of God to help us to replace these thoughts with hope, with peace, with joy. And in this sense, Paul's suggestion here is totally different. And he speaks of course, about the peace which transcends all human understanding, the peace that Epicurus was talking about, and Seneca and other authors of that time, was purely human peace, which was supposed to be achieved by using purely human methods, training your mind, like in Hinduism, repeating some mantra. But Paul is introducing divine intervention. This is not human peace. This is divine peace. This is peace that God gives to his friends. We have to pray. We have to address our petitions to God. We have to be thankful to God in everything. And then the peace which transcends all human understanding will come to our mind. And of course, we have here what Paul is suggesting, that we should revocatio, that we should put in our mind whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable. If anything is excellent and praiseworthy, think about such things. So Paul speaks here about hygiene of our mind, that we should pay attention. What are the dwellers of our mind? And he's urging Philippians to replace these negativities and to replace them with all these positive things. But he finishes this section and says, and the God of peace will be with you. Constantly this supernatural element is present here in this passage. This is not purely a technique that human beings can exercise. This is human beings should initiate the process and let God help them to have, to enjoy, to reach, to attain this special state of enlightenment of mind. And I think this was the experience of thousands of Christians throughout human history. I don't need to tell you how what happened to many Christians, like John Huss, for example, who was burned on stake in Prague, in Czech Republic, today's Czech Republic, and or here in Oxford, where you live, several people have been burned and at stake there, and there are monuments in Oxford. You can see them, and more or less they, of course, there is fear, but they went peacefully through these moments. So now, when we are going through these extremely complex times in human history, I think we have to take care of the hygiene of our mind, but at the same time, trust God, that God can bring peace to our minds and our bodies. This is the message, I believe, of Philippians chapter 4, verses 6 to 9. And may God bless all of us. Amen.